Greetings to you, and thank you for watching this continuing series of videos on the Catechism from the Book of Common Prayer, an outline of the faith. We are concluding the section on human nature, and if you'd like to follow along in the questions, it's on page 845 of the prayer book. A question at the end of this section: how did God first help us? And just to review a bit, the context that we've explored so far is grounded in the first 3 chapters of the Bible, the book of Genesis. And what we have noted in these questions and answers is that we are both creatures made in the image of God, and that we are, as the second question says, free to make choices, love, create, reason, live in harmony with creation, with God. And it goes on to touch on the nature of our sinful state, which is, why then do we live apart from God, out of harmony with creation? From the beginning, human beings have misused their freedom, made wrong choices. And why do we not use our freedom as we should? Because we rebel against God. We put ourselves in the place of God. And so what it's doing up to this point in the sequencing of the questions is to hold both realities in front of us, that we are made in the image of God, in God's likeness, with these capacities for love and freedom and creativity and reason and community that is unique in the creation, and that nothing in what's called the fall in Genesis undoes any of that. What it does is distort it. It puts it out of focus. The introduction of sin is not the deprivation of the image of God in us and the capacities and gifts that come with it. It is their misuse. God continues to give the capacities to each of us and hopes for and longs for their right use in us. And so whenever I hear a description of human beings as broken, for example, I get concerned about that kind of language, because the temptation is to either inflate our capacity for good and say, well, sin's not such a big deal, we're basically good people. And then the opposite distortion is to say that we're so broken and so sinful that we can't do much of anything good, and how could God use us, and what could we contribute? And so right at the beginning, what the questions are wanting to do is to help us avoid either of those extremes. Either to make our goodness absolute and diminish the presence and capacity and reality of sin and evil, or to make us so sinful and evil that we might as well just give up and we're utterly useless and without any capacity for good. But what the Catechism is saying is that we are made in the image of God, and creatures who regularly misuse that image. Doesn't mean the image is gone, doesn't mean it's obliterated, doesn't mean that we are deprived of it, but that it is misused. It's a very important way to ground the nature of the human person, because we are both creatures who are endowed by our being with capacities and gifts that God desires us to use for good, and that we need help in coming to understand, to be strengthened and directed in how to use our gifts and powers for good. So we have a predisposition toward self-preservation, self-will, and getting our way. But that does not mean that we are bound to act that way. It does not make acts of love and sacrifice and generosity meaningless, but we have to confront in ourselves the tendencies toward selfishness and whatever other forms of self-preservation occur in our lives. And so that sets up this last question, which I'll read again. How did God first help us? God first helped us by revealing himself and his will through nature and history, through many seers and saints, and especially through the prophets of Israel. So what's inherent in the answer is something very important about the nature of God. That in our imperfection, God comes, seeks us out, and provides for us the help that we need in order to recover the idea, the inspiration, the will and strength, the decision to live a holy, righteous, just, loving lives. We can only go so far on our own. We can have some inkling of what goodness is. We can aspire to a world in which we live in peace and generosity and neighborliness with our communities, and we can dream of a kind of life where persons are respected and safe and welcomed and loved. But we as human beings consistently fall short of being able to create that, with the assumption that we are capable of doing it, and we can do it if we have the fortitude and the will, the perseverance to do it. So God's help is not provided for us because we are utterly helpless. God's help is provided for us because we do not know in our own selves the correct aim, the fullness of the meaning of what we desire and how it might be lived out. And so God comes in saints and prophets and in various means of voices and examples and calls to bring us back into the focus on, for example, what is the nature of neighborliness? How do we live out justice? What does peace mean? And we never arrive at conclusions to those questions that make the questions then no longer helpful or relevant. These are the kinds of questions that we have to continuously ask each other in various different circumstances and relationships because our perception is limited, our motives are mixed, our strength is incomplete. And God fills in and supports us in our desire to live what we most deeply want. And so the prophets, for example, as we'll get into a bit more in later questions, are not voices that come to tell us we're bad and we need to be better. They're voices that remind us of what it means to be human so that we can orient ourselves towards our truest, fullest nature as human beings and live from that place. Anything less is hurting ourselves and our neighbors and is not going to bring us the fulfillment that we want. There may be some attraction to being selfish and arrogant and judgmental in the moment and in the short term, but those kinds of responses are not what we most deeply desire. So the prophets are sent to recall to us our being, our nature, our creation, our purpose, our capacities, our abilities and gifts. And as we proceed into a discussion of the scriptural story of how God comes to save and help us, we'll especially focus on that aspect of being those creatures in need of help, for whom help is provided if we are willing to take it, and in the receiving of that help, find the kind of life and relationship that we most deeply desire. Thank you for watching this video. See you next week. God bless you.